of September 7, 2017 of the City of Bethany Planning and Zoning Commission to order. First matter we'll have is our invocation. Please pray. Dear Lord, thank you for your gifts. We pray for those affected by the recent storms and for those who are in harm's way. Guide this commission with your wisdom as we consider the matters before us tonight. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. If you would, let's stand for our Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item on our agenda is approval of the minutes of the August 17, 2017 meeting. Are there any comments, modifications, amendments, discussion? Is there a motion?
I make a motion that we accept.
Second? Is there a second?
A second.
Please vote. Thank you. For those of you in the audience, the Planning and Zoning Commission is a recommending body to the City Council. The City Council can accept, reject, or modify the recommendations of the Planning and Zoning Commission. We have one item on our agenda this evening. It is item PC 17-12. This is a public hearing to consider amendments to the Bethany Code pertaining to sidewalks. And it is my understanding that our city manager will address us. Mr. Cox, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your time this evening. I want to thank you again real quick for your service to our community. It's phenomenal to have such a strong planning and zoning commission. I appreciate the work that you all do. It's very important to our city, so thank you. We are here tonight to chat with you on a couple different levels. One level, we are proposing and putting in front of you a ordinance proposal that will make it easier to build sidewalks in Bethany. But on the other level, I would like to share with you a bigger picture of what we have going on in Bethany as far as what the program that we're calling Let's Get Connected. And we're calling it that for now because that came out of a staff meeting that we had as a brainstorm. As you might recall, the comprehensive plan, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, talks at length about connecting people, places, and things inside of our community. I have joked more than one time about when I moved here, I was asking who stole all the sidewalks out of Bethany. We seem to have a shortage around our community of sidewalks. And so the comprehensive plan obviously recognized that. We see Oklahoma City doing lots of activity around us, building trails and pathways. And so I'm going to come back in just a little bit and talk to you about the big picture. But the first part of the big picture, though, is making it easier for people to build sidewalks. Right now, we feel it's onerous for people to build sidewalks and expensive. And I'm going to turn the podium over to Danielle to visit directly about what it is we are proposing and asking for you to weigh in on, and then I'll come back and then talk more big picture with you in just a little bit. So, Danielle?
Ms. Barker?
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
So, as was mentioned, the process right now to build a sidewalk is very complicated, and it's kind of difficult for a normal resident to be able to do. You'd have to go through engineering, get engineered drawings. It's basically considered a public improvement. So much like you'd do a street or something like that, you'd have to go through engineering drawings, you'd have to get site plans, you'd have to get specs, you'd have to put bonding and things like that. So it's very complicated, very expensive. And so as a regular resident that only has a 50 to 100 foot lot, they're going, no. So, but what we're wanting to do is kind of create it to where it's more like a driveway permit that it is now, where it's still inspected by city staff. They still have to submit plans. They still have to kind of go through the permitting process, but it's going to be less complicated and most likely less expensive for them to be able to get it this way, versus having to go through and having it as a public improvement. Essentially, they're going to have it as where they have to submit plans. Like I said, it has to be built to city standards, and the inspector will have to go out and inspect it. The engineer will also have to take a look at it, things like that. So that's essentially what we're wanting to do, kind of in a nutshell. So if there's any questions or anything, feel free to ask that, and we can talk through this.
How complicated do you foresee the process being? Meaning, if my neighbor and I wanted to put in a sidewalk ourselves, could we come down here and talk to the city and get an idea of what's required first? And then, like, dig out the area and understanding what we need to do? And then is it a step process where the engineer would, or someone would come out and inspect like what we've done so far, and then come out afterward or something to determine that it was properly built? Or how do you foresee that process working?
I foresee it basically where it kind of happens now when someone says, hey, I want to do this, I need a driveway, for example. They'll come in and say, this is what I'm wanting, and then the inspector or engineer will look at it and say, okay, well, this is the city standard, this is what's required, and then they'll go out and they'll say, okay, they'll build that, and then it's inspected again. Sometimes they will, a lot of times they will go out and do kind of visual inspections before the work is done, just to kind of get an idea of what the lot is like and kind of the exact circumstances, because nothing is exactly the same. So they'll kind of look at it, and it's much like what you described.
But it is something that a regular citizen, if they wanted to undertake the project, could do.
Yes, yes.
There's a set of standard specifications downstairs, and they could leave here with a copy of that, and it tells them exactly how thick the concrete needs to be and where the joints need to be, and those kinds of things.
Yeah, they could easily hand that drawing to a contractor and say, this is what I'm needing, or a concrete pour, and be able to get that done. Okay. Yeah, we can go through each of the items of the ordinance that's going to be changed. So, let's see, we'll start off with Title 13, Chapter 131, placing signs on private property. That's going to be having nameplates, and that's going to be removing that sentence, essentially basically not having those signs on the sidewalks. Then that was 131.09. The 131.10, public streets and trees, subsection E requires inspector permission for a driveway approach. The proposed language is requiring a permit to construct a sidewalk.
What would be the typical cost of a permit to build the sidewalk? I mean, is it expensive permit, or is it just really to make sure they come down and properly get the information they need to?
For a driveway permit, it's $54.50 right now. So I'd imagine it's probably, unless we're otherwise advised, I imagine it'll be around that.
But if somebody was doing just the sidewalk, they were adding that to their property, would it be the same amount?
I haven't heard anything different, but my guess is probably it'd be right around that $54.50, the same as the driveway.
All right, because if we're trying to encourage it, then we might want to do something about lowering
Right.
that permit cost.
Right. Okay, that's
Just,
a good.
I mean, I don't know that that's something we need to discuss tonight, but
Right.
I'm just saying.
Right, that's
For
something that we've
future
kind of.
reference.
Yeah, we've kind of discussed that a little bit internally, but we haven't really sat there and concreted that in, so to speak. Right here.
Are those fees set by the council?
Yes.
Okay. So that's something the when this proposal comes to the council, my representative can make sure that is, since this is something we want to encourage, that there is either no fee or a nominal $5 fee, just to make sure you have a way to track the process.
Okay.
You got that, Jeff?
Now, that fee also will include an inspection,
Yes.
so that needs to be taken into account when you establish the amount too, so.
Well, I think
I
if
think a
you're,
typical inspection is a minimum of $25.
I believe
so,
that's right.
You know, you'd need to try to recover that cost, and the reason this isn't relaxed any more than it is that under Oklahoma law, a city is liable to maintain sidewalks on public property in a reasonably safe condition. So you don't want, you know, to just say, do whatever you want to do, because, you know, you could end up with a safety hazard of some sort that the city could become liable for.
well, speaking to that, the one thing, since that has come up, the one thing that I couldn't completely understand was why the item would typically be something that then becomes part of the city's property if you,
Because it's built on the right of way.
well, typically, doesn't that become something on the right of way, like a sewer line is accepted by the city and is their responsibility after that? Sidewalks that the city is building in various and sundry places that the property owner is not paying for, those are the property of the city. Would not the improvement then become the property of the city, even though the owner is responsible for maintaining it?
Yes, it's on the right of way, so yes, it would become city property.
Well, I would be happier with it if, you know, I don't want to get involved in the maintenance bond and all the rest of that that goes with other improvements that are for the, end up being the ownership of the city. But I would think after a period of 5 years or so, that the responsibility for maintaining it, if it's built to city specification, should become that of the city. If it's on the right-of-way, you have no control over a utility coming in and having to cross the sidewalk or having the sidewalk damaged by other concerns. The sidewalk in front of my house had been in place less than 2 weeks when there was a car wreck. A car went airborne, came down on the sidewalk, and there's a big hunk cracked on it. It has been for the 20 years it's been there. So I would be happier if after a period of time it was a responsibility of the city rather than the homeowner.
Is there any reference as to other ordinances around that, how they address that when something's built on an easement, like a sidewalk?
No, but the law is clear. If there's a sidewalk on public property, the city has a duty to maintain it in a reasonably safe condition because it's on public property,
Well, then how can we?
regardless of who
owns it?
owns it, yeah. Because it's on public property.
So that's the case here.
I would say yes.
So they build it there.
If someone trips over a bump in the sidewalk, the city's probably going to answer for that. And that's true of any sidewalk. Ones up in downtown Bethany in front of those stores. Probably some of those are in the right of way, some aren't probably, but you know, the city has typically maintained those in a reasonably safe condition. Sidewalks, as you know, after years, the top coat sloughs off and they get loose gravel in them and all kinds of things happen.
Having heard that, I would prefer that last sentence of the analysis, once we get to the adoption part of it, that we would remove that the property owner would be responsible for any maintenance of the sidewalk, because it's, if I understand what Mr. Davis has just said, the city is responsible for anything that happens on it, and therefore
Well,
the city should.
You know, I guess for what it's worth, it doesn't hurt anything to put that in there. But, you know, the ultimate responsibility, if there's a dangerous condition and the property owner refuses to fix it, the city's going to have to go out and do it, or run the risk of being liable for an injury that might occur. Typically, sidewalks, once they're built, are maintained by the city.
I had a couple of items, questions. No, go ahead. Well, okay, so I would like to see, in 2010, the Department of Justice issued out guidelines for ADA compliance, and specifically, then they followed up and they did, in 2011, they issued out a draft of the public right-of-way ADA guidelines and PROWAG, okay? So you have ADAAG, and then PROWAG is for sidewalks on public right-of-way. And that guidance was put out in 2011. Based on a Department of Justice complaint, the city of Oklahoma City had to go through a whole process, and they, in July of 2011, they went ahead and adopted at the city council level the PROWAG, or Public Right-of-Way Accessibility Guidelines. And I feel like, and this is a great program, this is a great idea. I think the ordinance refers back to city engineering specifications, which there are sidewalk details in there. It has basic cross slope dimensioning, but it does not go far enough as it pertains to these PROAG requirements. So I think if we're going to encourage a great program, and we're going to allow contractors and residents to go out and build to a detail, then we need to maybe add that extra step as a companion to this, to go ahead and see if the city of Bethany would proceed with adopting the PROAG as part of, and it just reinforces it. So, you know, as Mr. Carlson was talking about, your concern is about the liability and all. Based on the 2010 ruling from the Department of Justice to the city of Oklahoma City, it's the Department of Justice said they will hold the city of Oklahoma City responsible for ADA compliance. And then the city then would hold contractors, engineers, you know, individual developers to do that. So I think that added to this would be something that would provide that. And it's a relatively painless process to go through. All of those guidelines are already here. And then if we adopt these changes, and as an engineer, I initially worry about when you take engineers out of it and say, let's take the engineer out so that we just go build it, okay? So I think if we were to strengthen our standard details and provide some additional details that follow this 2010 guideline on ADA from the Department of Justice, you provide those details along with the standard city specifications, you adopt the PROAG guidelines. Then, when John Smith Public comes out and says, hey, I want to go build a sidewalk, he walks in, he has a sketch on his little site plan and says, I want to do this. If it's just a straightforward thing and it fits those guidelines, that's great. But what happens if he's on a corner? Well, then he's going to have a curb return or ramp. You have to have the tactile devices in place. So A lot of those things are the most common mistakes in building a sidewalk. And if we don't have specific details for this contractor or resident to use, then it's kind of up in the air. And then if let's say the tactile devices aren't right, or let's say the cross slope is off by not 2%, or if it's exceeding the 8.3 12-to-1 slope, those are all things that can easily be handled by somebody, even a resident building his own sidewalk. But you have to clearly define what that is. So I think it seemed like we were streamlining parts of the ordinance, which is a great thing. But then I think we need to either look at, which without having the other sections, to see, do we need to add and refer to some additional requirements that can be handed out and used beyond the standard specifications?
Do you, I guess, first of all, I'm not familiar with the guidelines that you're talking about, but in concept, it sounds like a great idea. I'm curious, though, if that were enacted in policy as opposed to in ordinance. Do you have an opinion, David?
I think if you change the specifications, and I'm surprised they're not here, because the sidewalks that the city has built have met those specifications. I think this one right out here does, at the corner.
That does or that needs
Does.
it? Yes.
And so they must have had some specification to build that to.
Well,
so-
and I don't disagree. I mean, I'm familiar with the city specifications, but these PROAG details are actually more specific in a lot of different ways. And
Yeah,
think
I
it
just
would-
assumed we had them already, but I think all that's required is to ask the engineer to update the sidewalk specs to include those.
Right,
things.
and so that's why, as an example, they went through, the city of Oklahoma City adopted that. Now, they just adopted those PROAG requirements as part of the process. So maybe that doesn't have to go in here, but it's a companion to
The specifications.
being able to expand all these sidewalks. And then, I think then you're putting the city in a better position to being a good steward of, we are going to follow public right-of-way standards that are the most recent that are out there.
Very good. All right. Great idea.
Yeah, I just had a conversation with Mr. Caton earlier today about sidewalks, not this particular issue, but we were discussing what's required to build sidewalks either by city crews, and of course he was saying that if it's a lengthy sidewalk, you're dealing with utility relocations, for instance, and it may be a water meter or gas meter in the way. So sometimes there are other issues too, but I think the key is the permit, and if our specs aren't up to speed, they should be.
And that's why I think it's
Yeah.
it's in concert. It's not specifically anything here. I think also the language where it says if it requires a minimum of 5 feet sidewalk. Okay, so running down that path, what if John Citizen comes in here and says, okay, I want to do a 4-foot sidewalk? Well, you can do a 4-foot sidewalk, and there are ways you can do that per the ADA, but if we want to maintain 5, are we going, what if you can't maintain the 5? I mean, those are the scenarios that I was looking at when I was reading this. What are you going to do if you have, say, an obstruction in the way of that keeps you from doing the 5 feet? Do you allow the sidewalk to go? Do you allow a temporary easement, allow it to go around the obstruction on private property, and then does that require then a permanent easement to go back? Those are just some things that I think we need to tie back into our policy and procedures, not just in this ordinance. And I don't want to complicate it, but that's the first thing that's going to happen is somebody's going to show up here and they're going to say,
hey, I want to build a sidewalk. And then they're at the corner of a non-arterial street, and then all of a sudden, they're like, well, I just want to build a sidewalk. Well, I don't want to put in, two-way full wheelchair ramp with tactile domes. Well, are we going to allow that or not? And that's the things that we need to figure out, I think.
I think great questions. And what I would offer in reply would be that I think it's our job to establish some minimums and some standards. And I think that's what this is doing, is it's saying that 5 foot is the new standard in Bethany. And but we're just starting the process. In a moment, I was planning to say, hey, this is first step, and we're asking for your guidance on this measure and then some other measures as well. We feel that 5 foot is appropriate for sidewalk construction in this day and time, with the other interests in utilizing trail systems and sidewalks that exist. 4 foot seem to be kind of by the wayside. I suppose maybe there could be some exception if there just physically is not possible in a certain area, like the examples that you mentioned a moment ago. That would seem to be reasonable to me to allow for that.
And that's why I think I agree with 5 feet. I think if we adopt this and we say 5 feet sidewalk, then it will create the scenario when that won't work. Then you'll have to figure out, well, is there an exception to that or not? And if that's the case, then how are we going to handle that? Because you would rather work towards a solution to obtain additional foot of right-of-way and then be able to put a 5 foot sidewalk if you can only put a 4 foot sidewalk.
A good example of that would probably be 36th Street going west, where there's a ditch alongside the roadway, and that's going to take some planning on how to get a sidewalk in there and how wide it can be, I suppose.
Yeah.
There may be areas where it could only be 3 feet wide because of the topography. I think you could add a language clarifier to that, saying it'll be 5 feet wide except where technically or physically not feasible.
Or with some must be 5 feet unless approved by the city, or we've added we've gone to the city manager or designee here.
Well, I think you'd have to have some basis for that saying we're not physically or technically feasible, because you don't want to just give the city the discretion.
Right.
Because they like you to make it 3 feet, if they don't, make it 5.
Yeah, we would really appreciate it if we had some.
I don't know that I would say put the exception in here. I think what I'm advocating is we go and adopt the PROAG. I know it's like a new idea, but let's go adopt it if we haven't. Maybe we have, I don't know. But if we adopt the PROAG requirements, I think it gives another layer, and then we develop, some kind of standard detail set that is in addition to the engineering packet that takes care of a lot of these exceptions. Then when you give it to the citizen and say, hey, you're going to go do it, that contractor, if they're going to build it themselves, there's less question.
Since Mr. Caton will likely be the one to judge these applications, I suggest we need his input on how to accomplish that, probably. So
I would agree.
I would like to ask a question since we're on the width of the sidewalk. My understanding on sidewalks in commercial areas is that they're supposed to be 6 feet if your property is zoned commercial.
It's on major thoroughfares or expressways.
All right. Major thoroughfares, section line?
Usually it'd be like Rockwell, 23rd, 36th, 39th, Council. Yes, mostly our section line roads. I was trying to think if thought there's one other one, but that's the main ones.
Would our 5 foot be an exception if a residence is on 36th an exception from the 6-foot requirement?
That's a good question.
And going to Mark's comment about the physical end of it, if you look at the sidewalk on 23rd Street going west from the grocery store at Rockwell up to Wilburn, that's a 5-foot wide sidewalk that was put in the late 90s by the city, and it was 5 feet instead of 6 feet because of the terrain and the telephone poles or light poles along there. And it came up in the approval of the site plan for Family Dollar. An Eagle Eye resident of this horseshoe insisted upon and got a covenant, restrictive covenant, that, or what the kind we use when the 27-year paving thing for a 1-foot difference on the sidewalk, and that if the other sidewalks there became 6-foot wide, Family Dollar would have to expand that from 5 feet to 6 feet. You know, I understand that sometimes the physical difficulties, particularly there on 23rd, where you have such a change in elevation, or going north on Rockwell, where there's a huge bar ditch on the east side of the roadway.
Just a quick question back to what Mark brought up on the Department of Justice. So, do we comply or not? I guess I'm not really fully understand if underneath all the stuff that we provide to people and give to contractors, I mean, do we currently apply, or are we just making a reference that we obviously need to
The
apply
City
that?
of Bethany standard engineering details do comply with ADA requirements.
But not the ruling?
Well, they do not go as in-depth or as far as the 2010 Department of Justice ADA guidelines.
Okay.
And I'm not certain that we've incorporated the 2011 or 12 PROAG guidelines into our city standard details, which is not hard to do. There's a pamphlet that they put out from the Department of Justice. You can slap the details together and you just are augmenting it. So I think if we encourage this whole plan, let's go one step further and kick it up a notch and say, let's go ahead and get the city to adopt PROAG requirements. And then I think it goes back to what Mr. Carlson was saying. Then if you're worried about what happens on public right-of-way, well, then you're much more defensible in what happens if people are building it. Then you've done everything that you can by saying, hey, we're taking it to the most current federal guidelines that are out there when you're building it.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense, especially in your, what is this thing you put out for Let's Get Connected, where you say that we hopefully limits the city's liability? I think that would be a good idea.
I concur. I think that's a really good idea, and I'd like for us to explore that.
The things that our guidelines don't cover are such things as the grade going downhill and the height of the end of the ramp off the pavement.
And you know,
those kinds of things.
there's a saying about there's a saying in this general idea of, well, it's just a sidewalk. Okay, well, now the thing is to say, well, it's not just a sidewalk, because you have a lot of exceptions when it comes down to building sidewalks. It's probably harder to do that than it is to build a road, because a road, you've got a much larger right-of-way. You're not dealing with all these other little obstructions around. Mm-hmm. So I think the issue is saying, let's adopt something that has a better detail of what goes on in the public right-of-way, and then we have to figure out, if we have 4 people that build a sidewalk in front of their 200-foot stretch, well then, somewhere in the plan, is the city going to make the step forward and make the leap and say, well, why don't we put the wheelchair ramp in with the tactile devices? Because otherwise you've got 700, 800, 900, 1,200 feet of sidewalk, and then you have no way of getting down from the curb to the street, which makes it inaccessible. So if you approve certain sidewalk pieces, then we need to have a policy of then the city bring in city forces to finish up the job so that we can maintain a complete access. That's what the Department of Justice looks for. Is you can't just build part of it and then not have all of it accessible.
So in just a few moments, when we conclude this part of the conversation, I'll be visiting about the kind of the rest of the story, the Paul Harvey rest of the story. So I kind of wonder if perhaps that type of detail might be added into the rest of the story as kind of close the loop on the rest of that.
Perfect.
I think that's a great thought as well.
I have one other question for Danielle. In the couple of years that you've been sitting there in this capacity, have we had anyone come in and ask to build a sidewalk?
No residents, no.
Okay.
Not that I know of anyways. I'll preface with that.
I would love for it to happen, but I just wondered what the likelihood was.
Right, and I kind of wonder on that, if it's not because they look at it and they read the ordinance going, no, that's too complicated. I know whenever we do the subdivisions and people want to come into subdivisions, we have that as a public improvement saying, okay, you have to meet this. And that has killed many subdivision deals.
Well, I'm very personally well aware of that. Yeah.
Yes, you are. So, but yeah, that's happened numerous times where we've had people want to come in and do subdivisions on a residential property. And that's usually one of the deal breakers is one of the public improvements, sidewalks, streets, water, sewer.
I have a question. On my street, most of the houses have multiple cars, 3, 4, that park too deep in driveways. Their cars are going to be in the right of way of the sidewalk if they decide to put sidewalks down my street. To my understanding, unless I'm wrong, that's illegal. You can't block that sidewalk. Is that true?
It shouldn't be in the right of way anyway.
Okay, well, but they are.
And that's going to be a hard thing to catch unless it's a PD type of call, because usually it's going to be in the evening, so city staff isn't here unless it's police.
In a typical residential lot, the last 12 feet of your driveway is in the public right of way. I don't think we have a specific ordinance that would prohibit you parking in your driveway so that you couldn't cross on the sidewalk. I don't remember one like that. Now, we have one that prevents parking on a sidewalk, but that would be different than parking on your driveway, I think.
If I might ask a question of our city attorney, so that so we talked about the policy as was brought up earlier about potentially the city looking to adopt the Department of Justice guidelines. That can be done separately. But if I heard the discussion correctly, the one thing that might need to be addressed in the ordinance as it's currently set forth is maybe distinguishing between the 5 foot in most areas versus perhaps a 6 foot provision in certain areas that are along the major thoroughfares.
I jotted down something that probably would fix that.
Okay.
It says, where a lesser width is necessary due to unusual physical property features, the city engineer may approve a lesser width. I think that would take care of it.
Okay, but then we need to take care of that where we want a commercial. We need to be able to say you have to do a 6 foot.
Well,
In those certain areas where it's required.
Right, because
I don't think our sidewalks are differentiated by commercial, they're differentiated by what kind of street they're on.
The
Okay.
street classifications, yeah.
So then, would that be covered would it be covered if it says, if it's on 36th Street? Is that just covered by the fact if they ask to do on 36th Street? Is that in the
If
ordinance
it's-
on the
if-
sidewalk already?
It says if it's on a major thoroughfare or expressway, it has to
It
be.
has to be 6 feet.
And I believe 36th is classified as a
Yeah.
major thoroughfare. Now, 50th Street is not, I don't believe.
No, 50th Street is not. I believe the only ones that are is Council, Rockwell,
Nor is 16th Street.
no, 23rd, 36th, and 39th Expressway. I think that's the only ones that are classified as major thoroughfares.
So
You know,
in
but
those
regardless of what street it's on, you could still have the situation where you had a 8-foot diameter oak tree in the way, and it might not be feasible to
Feasible,
do
okay,
that.
so,
You know, it seems to me that the exception needs to be available at the engineer's discretion.
right.
I think the concern, as I understood, was, and perhaps you've addressed it, that someone that was on one of these major thoroughfares wouldn't say that, well, wait, no, the code says 5 foot. Why do you want us to build 6 foot? I think that was
Say
the
no
question.
less than.
No less than.
Yeah.
So it could mean they could go larger.
Yeah.
So
They
you're
could always go
you're-
wider if they want to do.
So then, I think what I was going to say tonight earlier, the 158.32, where the proposed change said, the construction of a sidewalk shall conform to the specifications approved by the city council for sidewalks. I had originally come in here with the suggestion of, well, let's refer to ProAg in here too. But if we want to do this as part of a broader plan, then we can take this, the ProAg and the Department of Justice as part, another companion item, and just strengthen that. Then I would have no objection to that change, as long as we're thinking along that line. But if we don't go that route, then I think we need to have consideration that we would say the city specifications and/or latest federal guidelines, et cetera, but without adopting them first, I don't think you should put that in this ordinance, so.
I will tell you that those guidelines present some real strange looking installations. There's one close to my office where there's quite a drop from the sidewalk down to the adjoining street, and it's kind of terraced, like it has 4 turns going down.
I totally understand. I do. I just, it's hard when you have to defend it later on if you've not done it, or you have to tear it out and then say, okay, Mr. Citizen, you built this, but now somebody else is complaining about it, and then you got to tear it out, and they spent their money on it. So,
We were obligated to do that on part of the widening of 36th Street because there was some federal funds involved in it, and we did do some accessibility construction on 36th Street.
well, and the most easiest thing to mess up is you buy the tactile warning devices. Well, if you don't install it at the right angle, then you got to tear out the whole sidewalk. So I don't think we should be building it without putting those in, because then we could be held responsible for it as a city for allowing them just to put it in without having those devices, so.
If that is it on that part, I'll go ahead and shift gears, and then maybe we could kind of come back in a little bit and wrap it up, if that's okay. So I'd like to draw your attention to back to your packet and talk about the bigger picture. So again, tonight is what we're looking at as being the start of a conversation, and we're already hearing really good feedback and ideas on this, and hopefully this will just be the beginning of more very positive conversation about making this the best program it could possibly be. So with that, I'd like to kind of shift gears just a little bit. So we've been talking about making it easier for people to build sidewalks in Bethany, and that's what we're identifying as the first prong. The second prong is for what we're calling city-constructed sidewalks. We have already begun, the city has, to construct sidewalks. Our city staff has not, for years, I'm understanding, built sidewalks, so we had a little bit of a learning curve to go through, plus the folks in the streets department have many other responsibilities that they have to do too. They can't dedicate their time 100% as much as I think we'd all like for them to be able to do just sidewalks and build new sidewalks. They have other things they have to do as well. But with that being said, we are doing what we can, and we have been learning, and as time goes on, we'll become even better at building sidewalks. What we did was I shared with the Parks Committee a little bit earlier, probably embarrassed to say how much time we have spent meeting on sidewalks and re-meeting and going over priorities. And what we wanted to do, excuse me, I'm sorry, is to identify those things that were the low-hanging fruit and what we could go ahead and do right away, and then work on a bigger picture and priorities, and we'll get to those in just a moment. And so the city staff has begun doing that, and the idea was where it is that we could connect either small stretches and connect existing sidewalks and have the biggest impact with kind of the smallest amount of staff time initially anyway while we're learning. And so the things we have done so far is 38th Street from Asbury to College, from College right over here, from 35th to 36th Street right along the City Hall property, and then Mueller, excuse me, on 38th and Peniel, we've had some trip hazards that are there, and currently we have city crews that are located over on 2900 North Rockwell, which is by the Family Video store. There's two pieces of sidewalk that exist, and we're going to tie those together, and there's a little bit of detail we're working on there. We have a number of other small little projects that we have identified that we're going to be working on relatively soon, but the bigger picture on sidewalks is the rest of the story, so to speak. And so I would draw your attention to the handout that should have been on your desk. We've got 4 copies up here if you all didn't get them. But what we have done is, again, this is a starting point. We're not here recommending, saying that we need to go do this in this order, or really even these streets, although we feel pretty strongly about a few of them, and we're hoping other folks will as well. So what we did, again, after a number of meetings, is we came up with a system that identified these, and we're calling them trails. The sidewalks that I mentioned just a moment ago, those mostly are going under this alpha trail that is at the very top here. We're using, by the way, side note, we're using Greek naming just for now, just as a starting point again, until someone comes up with better names. And I mentioned this to our Parks Board a little bit earlier. We'd love for them to come up with some sort of naming scheme or convention for our various trails that we have in the community. But for now, let's use Greek names. So the first trail we're calling Alpha would connect downtown and Southern Plaza and City Hall complex, as well as our brand new library that, by the way, it's pretty exciting seeing all the demolition going on next door. They're really moving along fast. But the Alpha Trail will connect those areas. What we're calling the Beta Trail then will also connect downtown Southern Plaza and City Hall complex, only a slightly different avenue, and that's not named on here. Is that Asbury? Is that Asbury? Via Asbury, and also so we'll connect the same general area. Gamma Trail is shown in orange, and it will connect the Children's Center, Southern Plaza to the library, and the City Hall complex. So let me quickly sidebar and chase my one rabbit of the evening. We have been working with the Children's Center And as you know, the new library, we did come in under budget on the library, which was great in that we are now able to be freed up to have the full plans for the playground equipment and the other amenities that were originally contemplated for the library now are back in play. We were afraid for a while that those were going to be areas that we would have to cut back. And so with that not having to be cut back any longer, we can go ahead and fully explore that. And a subcommittee has been named that is going to be, or not subcommittee, a task force that is looking at the playground equipment, that's also looking at arts for the library building. And I mention all that because one of the people that is, one of the groups that is serving on that is the Children's Center. The idea is that hopefully we can tie in those people, the users of the Children's Hospital, their families can also be users and can have access to our playground area that's right here nearby. And so again, kind of tying in that experience that people get when they come to Bethany. And I'll come back to the experience in just a little bit. So that's what Gamma Trail will do. Delta Trail is the area up north that would be kind of the Bethany Public Schools area. And it's shown in brown and is up at the top of the, I'm sorry, on this one is green. On my map is brown. Shown in the green up above. So again, tonight is the start, the beginning of a conversation and dialogue. Maybe there might be feedback on the way that could be done even better than what we initially have come up with. So this is staff's first swipe at this particular area. So again, that is Delta Trail. Epsilon Trail is perhaps our most difficult area. Epsilon Trail is 36th Street that would take us all the way from our east border to our west border, and this is my own personal opinion, others may have opinions otherwise. I think one of our most dangerous and concerning intersections is the Overholser Elementary School that is at 36th and Council. We have very little sidewalks. There are sidewalks that are a little bit on the west side of the street, but other than that, I live and commute that area every morning to work and see kids out there walking in the street, and it makes me a nervous wreck. And so I'm hopeful that, again, that can get addressed. But I have, as I mentioned a moment ago, I met with Steve Caton, our engineer. That is complicated and it's complex. And there definitely is engineering that will be involved in the construction of that. We may have to be creative in some areas. We may have to, as much as I think we would all prefer not to have to cross the street, we may have to at a couple places where it becomes so complicated. Our other option is, if we keep it all straight on one side, we may eat up a lot of our budget monies in acquiring right-of-way or dealing with drainage issues. So there's that story still is yet to be told on how all that kind of unveils and unfolds. But 36th Street is what we're identifying as Epsilon. And you can kind of think right now our first draft that we're throwing out, that this is kind of the initial priority in alpha, beta, gamma. So next after that would be what would be considered the Zeta Trail. So this is Council Road that would go from 23rd to 36th Street, and actually just a wee bit beyond 36th Street, right? And you've probably all noticed people also walking. I've seen baby strollers on Council Road, and it also makes me very nervous seeing people out in the street, because there are certain areas on Council where you can't walk in the grass. Now there are other areas we call them cattle trails, or what's the other term that's used? Goat trails that are used where people walk through the grass, and some of it's probably safer than being out in the street, but there are a couple areas where there's not on the further south side. So that again is identified as Zeta Trail. Eta Trail would be kind of its companion on the Rockwell side, so it would be Rockwell from 23rd to 36th Street. And then finally would be what we're calling Theta Trail. And so one thing I failed to mention a little bit earlier, thank you, Danielle, it's kind of hard to see right here, but if you see on 23rd Street where it's just a single red line, and then where it meets Rockwell and goes south from there, those are the areas of the excuse me, the ODOT project that we have going on. That is a transportation alternative program, a TAP program that we have underway, and we're at 70% engineering right now on the drawings of that. And what's our time frame on that? Construction idea? Yeah. So it may be early in 2018 calendar year when that's constructed. But the idea behind Theta Trail is it will then connect into that what we might call for simplicity's sakes, the ODOT project, and will continue to connect students to the schools. But then also 23rd Street it's encouraging in some respects because there are areas that there are sidewalks already existing. There are other areas where it's just parking lots and could be very easy for us to do some of those areas. We did not list it in the Alpha Trail because it wasn't the highest of priority. People can kind of get through those areas, and it would just be kind of extra improvements to do that part of the construction. So I wanted to mention that to you, that all those things we've kind of got underway currently. We have this year in our, so I mentioned this part 2 of the second prong in the city constructing sidewalks. So we have in our budget for this year, thanks to our city council, has allocated $350,000 for sidewalk construction for this year. I have authorized staff to go ahead and begin drawing up our bid specs for us to be able to go out for bid on a per yard or per square foot basis so that we can award a contract based upon that. And then once we have our priorities established and we have it firmed up, then we can go ahead and begin letting some of those projects and begin sidewalk construction in earnest relatively soon. I'm kind of anticipating that we'll probably communicate somewhere in the ballpark of $200,000 to $300,000 as an expected project amount. So construction companies that bid on this have an idea that we're not just doing some small potato little area, that this is a major undertaking. Again, so that kind of wraps up the second prong of the city going out for bid and constructing sidewalks. The third, fourth, and fifth will be quite a bit quicker conversation, and I might draw your attention to I think it should be at the back of your packet, is a bicycle trail. And the idea behind this in the third prong is for us to connect bike lanes. There's a lot of enthusiasm these days. We see it all over the metro for biking groups that get together and bike around the metro. And currently, we are not, if you'll forgive the pun, and it is intentional, we are not really on the map right now as far as bike lanes are concerned. People use certain bike lanes in Bethany, but I think with the lack of clear evidence, I think it's more of a happenstance, or perhaps they're using it for the lack of a better path to go. And so we had a meeting, as Gilbert Carlson knows, we had a visioning meeting for 23rd Street, and Mark Long was there last night, Danielle and others, some of our members of the council were there. And we broke up into groups, and one of the conversations that I was personally involved in was this connection conversation. And one of the gentlemen that was in our group is a part of a bicycling, is a bicycle enthusiast. And what I've passed out is a idea, really, is a way to consider that. We've been working on it with staff, but we had great suggestions come out of last night, which was there are groups of bicycling enthusiasts that we would maybe like to tap into to get their feedback on if they were to come through Bethany, how would they best transgress, come across and come through Bethany. Maybe it's not 23rd Street or 36th Street, maybe it's 19th Street. We heard some interest in that, and 30th Street was also expressed as an interest last night. So I think this is a story that, again, this is a first stop on or first swipe at this, and we're very much open to more feedback as far as that's concerned. Prong number 4 is to enhance our trail system. One of our greatest untold stories, in my personal opinion, in Bethany, is we are a city of parks. We have 238 square feet of parks per person in the community of Bethany. And is anybody surprised by that, or did you all know that already? I was shocked when we actually put pencil to paper and calculated that out. It seemed like we had a lot of parks. We have 13 parks. Now, the Parks Committee, again, I just came from a meeting with them just a little bit ago, and they are beginning this dialogue right now of where we go with our parks and what do we do with our parks and how do we enhance and make the best experience possible with our park system here. We also have an Arts and Culture Committee that we have started up, and they've also began very lightly having a conversation about if they could maybe even play a role in the arts in our parks and perhaps the use of not just events, but also the actual art itself could be incorporated into our park system and have a coordinated and organized and coherent plan to what the experiences are in our park system. So Elm Lion, Ripper Park come to mind. There are a couple others that people use on a very regular basis, but is there really a plan to all those? And so I'm excited about where the Parks Committee is today and the opportunity in front of them. So I just share that today as we do have this city of parks, and what we do with that and how we tell our story is, I think, kind of an exciting yet to be told story. The final prong I'd like to share with you is public transportation. This finally closes the gap, I think, on the loop on all of our transit types of ideas that are contemplated in the comprehensive plan. We have, again, the City Council has graciously set aside funds for us to explore public, not just to explore, but to implement public transportation for this year. But initially, we have $160,000 set aside for public transportation for Bethany in this fiscal year. We have a few projects on our plate right now, and I don't imagine we'll probably do the feasibility of public transportation until maybe third quarter of this year. I would anticipate, and so the feasibility study that we will be doing will incorporate the option of embark, and I say that as an option because it is, and that's where the $160,000 came from. By the way, is that would be kind of our entry level into the public embark transportation system in Oklahoma City. We've had a number of preliminary meetings with them, toured their facility. They run a great operation. Of course, it's funded by the citizens of Oklahoma City, and so if we were to add ourselves into it, just as some Norman has, and I believe one other city in the metro has as well. The idea is that while the citizens of Oklahoma City wouldn't pay for us, we would need to pay our own way. And so there's a lot of things to be considered in that feasibility study if we were to tie in. There's a question about ridership. How much would it be used? Is it really worth $160,000? It could be. The community I came from, this would be part of the other part, I think, that is maybe very interesting in public transportation conversation. The community I came from, we actually started up public transportation, our city did, and we ran it in-house. We received federal grants, and once we did the startup, it actually it became profitable. And it was a very good thing that we added. And we were able to do personal pickups as well as public stops. And so the idea behind that scenario is that it's feasible that we could connect to some of the embark stops. And so we could allow people to be able to transport not only from point to point within Bethany, but then to some other key locations, and those embark stops could potentially be some of those. So I would imagine that feasibility study, we'd probably have some sort of task force that I would probably at some point down the road recommend that we look at setting up of some people that might be stakeholders and interested in in that concept and be able to help us to navigate through that. No pun intended on that one. So with that, I've kind of held your attention, I think, way too long, and I appreciate your time. But I would be very interested in any initial comments that you might have, or if you want to think about it and provide comments later, we'd love to hear those as well. But as I said, tonight's a jumping off point.
Mr. Cox, I would speak for myself only, but I'm very excited about the enthusiasm that you have brought on our transportation type of thing. Your comment about when you leave your home and you see the kids walking on Council, going back 22 years, David particularly will remember our property on Rockwell had trees growing all the way out to the curb, and the kids had to literally step off of the curb where Mercy's doctor's office is now to go around the brush if they were headed north for the school. So when the sewer line went in for Mercy coming down south or coming north from the grocery store, that 30-foot stretch that you see now was all treed. So youth came here and thought, who stole the sidewalks? We have made a little change in the last couple of decades, so we're looking forward to even more in the coming years.
Wonderful.
One of the scariest things I've seen, and I've seen it many times, is that there was a lady they used a motorized scooter that lived at Bethany Place Apartments, and she rode her scooter from there to the grocery store at 23rd and Rockwell, down the outside lane of Rockwell, many times at or after dusk, and it's just impossible to see, especially in the wintertime. She'd have on a heavy dark coat, and that scooter was black or gray or something. And every time I'd see her, I'd just cringe. It's a horrible thing. But there's really no place else for someone to ride a scooter like that.
I think this is a great plan. I think you guys have come up with a really good, let's get connected. It's catchy. It's something we can promote. And I think that's something that we need to promote now more and more. Schematically, that's what you need to do. To be able to leverage other funding sources like the Safe Routes to School, the TAP program, thinking beyond the two projects we have going now under the TAP program. Just this right there will help you get through to leverage some more funding. That's a 2-year cycle. Things take a long time when you use the federal funds, but without a plan, you don't ever get there. And I think this is what we were trying to accomplish with the comprehensive plan, is to start doing more detailed plans and the last thing is I really think that public transportation part is an important part of connecting all this together.
Okay.
I think that Route 19, which is the Embark one that's along 23rd Street, is the highest ridership of all the Embark system. And if you look at it, you have a potential usage that goes all the way to Council on that. So I think that's been talked about for probably 15 years, that could be a viable extension. And I like your idea about connecting some kind of a localized one that maybe is not run by Embark, that could be run by the city, that could focus on taking people from the school district area, the 2 campuses, dropping them to 23rd, and then if they want to, then they can connect to Embark and then get downtown and go further. So I think some type of a localized circular could be a draw, a destination type thing, as well as providing the transportation. So,
Thank you.
Do you know on the City of Oklahoma City MAPS 3 sidewalk program that residents that want a sidewalk can pay 50% and the city does the other 50 and provide labor, materials, and all they have to do is pull a permit, is that right?
Once you answer that, and then I'll give the rest of this.
They do have that. They have to apply for it, and then I believe it's approved through the staff level, but it goes to their public works department essentially. So they go online, they have to fill out a neat little form, and then they have to kind of tell them what they're wanting to do, and then it has to be approved. So it's kind of like a permit, but it's a lot different. I think they also have to go through a building permit process too. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach on that, I believe.
Okay.
And if I could add some more to that, it's interesting that you bring that up because actually, I mentioned a little bit earlier. I was kind of embarrassed to tell you how much time we've spent on this in different meetings. It was only what was that? When did we have our meeting, Linda and Danielle? Was that last Thursday that we had the entire community development department meeting? And what I took the former iteration of this to them, and I said, okay, let's vet this and let's knock holes in it. And the result of that conversation, so the previous iteration actually had a component, a bigger component in that had we call it the incentive program, and so we were going to incentivize residential construction more. And then the outcome of that conversation, we wound up with keeping the part that we make it easy for people to build the sidewalks. But then we decided as a result of that we would probably be better served because we have so many sidewalks that need to be done in so many important areas that rather than having a lot of that $350,000 go into maybe residential areas that don't really connect, that we thought we would probably be better served. Love to have your input on it. We would be better served, we thought, by having the planned out areas kicked out first. So let me say that again. So do these areas that are the most impactful first was the idea versus some residential areas where there may not be. So I want to build a sidewalk on my property, but Danielle and April don't on theirs. And so does that really do a lot of public good then? So I'd love to have your feedback on it, but we thought maybe the dollars would be better utilized in this program. Any thoughts on that? Okay.
Well, on the MAPS program, they went through 5 phases, and so then this matching thing is a nice fit. But they went through their sidewalk master plan and then started hitting main arterial streets, get at least one side of the street done, follow the little goat trails, do what you can, and then start filling in the gaps later. So I think you're on the right track. Prioritization, get people to buy into the fact that this is where the public funds need to go. And then when they see the results on it, then, because when you start tackling which, I live in the district neighborhood, so the Delta Trail, that's a great idea. But you start tackling that, you're tackling a lot of different issues, not just a sidewalk on that. So.
And also, as long as we mention MAPS, of course I haven't been here when Oklahoma City's been going through their MAPS program, but I do have a lot of respect for the work that they have done and how they've built public confidence. And I think we, in our conversations, we have the opinion and hope that this too will maybe lead to one day a Bethany MAPS type of program that is even more elaborate. And so we're staying away from sidewalk master plan at this point and just talking about a program to get our community connected. But eventually that could be a future phase that we head down. Thank you very much for your time tonight. I appreciate your thoughts. If after the meeting and you have additional things, please don't hesitate to let us know. And because this is kind of like the old axiom: it's only as good as it's tested and vetted. And so, if you have more ideas, we'd love to have it. So we have the best program possible for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. we've had a lot of discussion. Is there some consensus or thought? Just further discussion?
Well, I'd be willing to make a motion on item number 1, PC 17-12, considering the amendments to the ordinance in the item to approve, a motion to approve.
Did that include the amendment I suggested?
Including the amendments per Mr. Davis.
I did forget one thing. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone else who wants to be heard? I apologize. Okay. All right. Back to the motion.
I will second that motion.
All right. Please vote. Thank you, everyone. That is the only item we have on the agenda tonight. I would like to thank Councilmember Harris and Councilmember Knapp and Attorney Collins for attending tonight. And of course, Mr. Cox, appreciate your presentation. I think it's an exciting time and for you and your staff. And Danielle, thank you for your presentation.
I did have one other thing to say briefly. I noticed in the obituaries today that Walter Brower died, and he was a longtime member of this planning commission and served here faithfully many years. So I think you'll find his obituary, I believe, in this morning's newspaper.
All our sympathies to his family.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to request of Danielle to take a look and see if we've had any response from the Greek Orthodox Church, if they've done anything that your department is aware of on our request for the sidewalk over there.
I can certainly do that, but I do know as of yesterday, I haven't seen any, I'll double check as far as any plans have been submitted, but there hasn't been any construction, so that I know as of yesterday.
We've not had any contact from them.
I have not heard from them. I'll double check with the rest of community development staff to see if they have, but I know no construction has been done as of yet, but we are keeping an eye on it, so.
Do you think maybe with Mr. Davis on that, the approval of changing the zoning was predicated upon the quote prompt unquote completion of the sidewalk? Should we?
That was included in the zoning ordinance as well.
Right.
So
Should we? Would it be appropriate to ask staff to remind them of that?
certainly, I mean, it was, city council directed it be done, so certainly it could.
I'll definitely do that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other matters? Do we have a motion?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Please vote.
It's your turn.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.